Today we're going to cover solving using the quadratic formula. Now, someone in my I period said, well, why can't I use the quadratic formula to solve any quadratic and not factor? She was correct. You could use the quadratic formula to solve any quadratic equation. Now, on the quiz, though, on Friday, you're going to have questions that are going to specifically just say to factor. And if you don't factor it, then you get it wrong. So they'll say factor instead of solve. So part of the questions are going to say factor, part of the questions are going to say solve. Any of the questions that say solve, yes, technically, you can use quadratic formula. However, keep in mind, factoring is a skill that you need to master, and you need to master it well, because next year in Algebra 2, you will factor all year long. So this is why I wanted to spend the time reviewing it with you, just to make sure that you understand the steps to follow. So let's go ahead and take a look at what the quadratic formula is. So for the quadratic formula, your equation must be in standard form first. You need to set it equal to 0. Then, once it's in standard form with the x squared term or your squared term first, then your variable that's not squared, and then the constant, and then set it equal to 0. What we're going to get from this equation is three values of variables. We're going to take the a, and that's going to be the number that's in front of the x squared. The b is going to be the number in front of your non-squared variable. And c is just going to be the constant. So all you're going to do is pull these three numbers out of your equation and then plug it into the quadratic formula. So you'll take your a value, and it's going to go in two different places, right here and right here. Maybe I should highlight this instead of writing on it. So a will go here. B is going to go here. Now this is going to be the opposite of b, or you can think of just make your b negative, and then b will go here as well. You'll square it. And then finally, you'll put your c value right here. Once you replace all those variables with numbers, then we're just going to follow order of operations, or PEMDAS, and then simplify it down. We are going to be leaving our answers in simplest radical form for the quiz. However, tonight for the Big Ideas homework, you're going to use your calculator, and they want you to round it to the tens place. And I'm going to show you both ways. So let's try our first example. I'm going to go ahead and write the quadratic formula up here at the top. So I have a little reference. You need to memorize it. So it's going to be the opposite of b. So this is x equals, once we're done here, this is going to give us what x equals. And then it's the opposite of b, or negative b, plus or minus, and then the square root symbol. And then you're going to square the b. You're going to subtract 4 times a times c. And this is all divided by 2 times a. So let's go ahead and take a look at our first equation. It's already in standard form for us, so we don't need to move anything around. My a value is the number here in front of x squared. When it's just an x squared or any variable squared, the number that you're going to assume in front of that, if there isn't one, is a 1. So my a value is 1. My b value, this subtraction sign is really a negative 4 here. So b is negative 4, and c is positive 2. I'm now going to take a, b, and c and plug them in to the quadratic formula. Okay, so we're going to replace everything that we have. So again, remember, this formula is giving us what x equals. So I'm going to put in the opposite of b, or negative of b. So it's really negative 4, what is going in there. So really it's going to turn positive. And then the plus or minus sign. Then I'm going to put b in here again, and I'm going to square it. and then minus 4 times A times C. This is all under the square root divided by 2 times A. Now that I've replaced all of the variables, I'm now going to follow order of operations. So again, that first negative B is really just saying the opposite of B. So since B initially was positive 4, this is going to turn in, negative 4. This turns into positive 4. And now I'm going to simplify what's underneath the square root. Negative 4 squared gives me 16. And then now I'm going to multiply. Now, when I do this, I'm going to treat this as a negative 4 that I'm going to multiply to the A and the C. So I'm really doing negative 4 times 1 times 2, and that gives me negative 8. And then 2 times 1, so the denominator is just 2. I now need to simplify what's under the square root. So this becomes x equals 4 plus or minus 16 minus 8 is 8 divided by 2. Now, do not simplify anything until you break down the radical first. If you try to simplify the 4 and the 2, you will get the wrong answer. You need to break down the square root first and put it in simplest radical form. Then you can start to simplify your fraction. So I need to break down the square root of 8. Now, we've probably done enough practice of this where a lot of you are going to realize it's 2 radical 2. But let me go ahead and break it down. 4 times 2, 2 times 2. Bring down that 2. I've got a pair of 2's. 2 comes out. And then the other 2 that didn't pair up stays underneath. So the square root of 8 in simplest radical form is 2 square root 2. So now what I'm going to do is I have x is equal to 4 plus or minus 2 square root 2. I'm replacing 8 with its simplest radical form over 2. Now I can simplify the fraction. This 2 that's in the denominator here, it needs to be able to divide into both of the numbers that are outside a square root evenly. If it doesn't, we can't simplify anything. So I can divide everything by 2. This becomes a 2. This becomes a 1. And this becomes a 1. So now in simplest radical form, the answer is 2 plus or minus the square root of 2. On the quiz, you can leave it with the plus minus sign. Big Ideas, though, is going to make you figure out what this is as a decimal. And here's what you're going to do. You're going to pull them apart. So it's going to become 2 plus the square root of 2 and 2 minus the square root of 2. So this plus minus that's here needs to be broken apart. Now, on the quiz, you can either enter it with the plus minus sign. So you can either leave your answer like this, or you can pull them apart. Tonight for the homework, what you're going to do is you're going to actually take out your calculator and you're going to do 2 plus the square root of 2. Once you do that, you're going to get x equals 3.4. You're rounding to the tenths place. And then you're also going to do 2 minus the square root of 2, which rounded to the tenths place will be 0.6. Circled in blue will be the answer I'm looking for on the quiz. The same thing will happen on the test. Once we start applying this to our circles, then the answers here that I'm going to circle in red, this is what Big Ideas is looking for. They're looking for the answer rounded to the tenths place. Number 2, again, I need to identify A, B, and C. It's already in standard form. I don't need to move anything around. So again, my A value is in front of x squared. So it's this 1 that is assumed to be there. So A is 1, B is -3, and C is -2. Those subtraction signs, if you think about it as keep, flip, change, or stay, change, change, they actually become negative numbers. Now that I have A, B, and C, I now can plug it into the quadratic formula. So let's go ahead and do it. So the opposite of B, since B is negative, it comes in here as a +3, then -3 squared minus 4 times A times C, all under the radical, I'm going to find the square root of that, divided by 2 times A. And this is what X is going to equal once I'm done. I need to follow order of operations underneath the radical first. So X is equal to 3 plus or minus 3 squared is 9. And again, I'm doing -4 times +1 times -2 gives me a +8 here. Divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. I now can add what's under the square root, and I get 3 plus or minus the square root of 17 over 2. The square root of 17 cannot be broken down. That is its simplest radical form. So for the quiz, you can just leave your answer just like that. Or, if you prefer, pull it apart. 3 plus the square root of 17, divide by 2, and 3 minus the square root of 17, divide by 2. Again, tonight, big ideas. You're going to pull out your calculator. You're going to do 3 plus the square root of 17, and then get that answer and divide it by 2. Once you do that, X is equal to 3.6. Over here, once you subtract it, it's -0.6. So these are going to be the two answers that you would have entered in for the homework tonight. So the quiz, either leave it with the plus minus sign or pull it apart. So what's boxed in blue would be what you would write as your answers on the quiz. What's in red, this is how you're going to enter your homework answers. Let's try number 3. Now, this one is actually going to turn into a perfect square. So the final answer I get on number 3 is going to be the same for the quiz as it is for the homework. This one, we can't leave it with plus minus, and you're going to see what I'm talking about. So again, let's identify our variables. A is 1, B is +2, and C is -48. I'm now going to go ahead and take these and plug them in to the formula. So opposite of B, or negative B, is -2, and then plus or minus B squared. So then minus 4 times A times C, and again, that's all under the square root, and then 2 times A. And this is going to give me what X equals. So again, I'm going to follow order of operations. -2 plus or minus under the radical, it's going to be 2 squared is 4. And again, I'm multiplying -4 times 1 times -48, and that gives me positive 192. And then for the denominator, 2 times 1 is 2. I'm going to simplify what's under the square root. I need to add 4 plus 192, and that gives me 196. Now, I do realize 196 is a big number, but honestly, it is a perfect square that you should have memorized. The square root of 196 is 14, so I'm going to actually square root it. So this will now turn into, and again, do not simplify those 2's. until you break down the radical first. So then I'm now going to get negative 2 plus or minus 14 divided by 2. You cannot leave it like this. You have to do the problems now. Now, you can simplify this if you want. Let's simplify it. Let's make this a 1, and a 7. So now I have x is equal to negative 1 plus or minus 7. I now need to separate it into two problems. You can't leave it like this for the quiz. Negative 1 plus 7 is one of the answers, and negative 1 minus 7. So negative 1 plus 7 is 6, and negative 1 minus 7 is negative 8. So this would be the answer that you would enter for the quiz and for the homework tonight. Number 4, all the other ones had just a 1 in front of x squared. The process isn't any different. The only difference is my a value is now just going to be a 3. So let's identify all the variables. So a is 3, it's right here. B is the number in front of x. And c is your constant. Going to take the 3 numbers now and put them into the formula. So the opposite of b, or negative b, is a negative 11, plus or minus 11 squared, minus 4 times a times c, and that's all under the square root, divided by 2 times a. This time our a isn't a 1. So let's go ahead, and again, this is what x equals. Let's simplify. So x is equal to negative 11 plus or minus, and then I get 121 is 11 squared. And again, I'm going to multiply this as a negative 4 times positive 3 times positive 6. And once I multiply all that, that's 72, or negative 72. Divided by 6. Pretty good? Now I have to subtract what's under the square root. And I get x is equal to negative 11 plus or minus the square root of 49 divided by 6. Again, I've got a perfect square here. This is going to turn into x is equal to negative 11 plus or minus 7 divided by 6. Again, because the square root disappeared, I have to separate it into two problems. Negative 11 plus 7 divided by 6, and negative 11 minus 7 divided by 6. So now this becomes negative 11 plus 7 is negative 4 over 6. I need to simplify the fraction. I can divide them both by 2, and it reduces to negative 2/3. Over here, for this one, negative 11 minus 7, this gives me negative 18 divided by 6, so x equals negative 3. So again, the two answers here, because the radical disappeared, this is going to be the same answer, or how you're going to leave your answer for the quiz and for the homework. So again, when the square root disappears, you do have to make the two equations and solve. The last one will have a radical. We'll do one more example, and then I'll work out homework questions. So again, let's identify A, B, and C. A is 1, B is 14, and C is 36. So let's plug it in. So negative B, or opposite of B, is negative 14 plus or minus 14 squared minus 4 times A times C. And this is all under the square root, and it's all divided by 2 times A. Let's simplify what's under the square root. So I get x is equal to negative 14 plus or minus 14 squared again, that 196. And then again, I'm going to multiply negative 4 times 1 times 36. And that gives me negative 144. Put that under the square root, divided by 2 times 1, which is 2. I have to subtract 196 and 144. This gives me 52. 52 is not a perfect square, but I can put it in simplest radical form. So let me do my factor tree. I know that 4 times 13 gives me 52. Break down the 4, 2 and 2. And then the 13. I've got a pair of 2's. Pull it out. So 2 square root 13 is 52 in simplest radical form. So now x is equal to, and again, do not simplify the 14 and the 2 until you break down the radical first. You will need to leave your radicals simplified and your fractions simplified. So here I can divide 14 by 2, 2 by 2, and 2 by 2. So this is going to leave me negative 7 here, positive 1 here. So now my final answer in simplest form is negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 13. Again, written as two separate answers, negative 7 plus the square root of 13 and negative 7 minus the square root of 13. In decimal form, x is equal to negative 3.4. And here, x is equal to negative 10.6. So for the big ideas, this is what it's looking for. For the quiz, either one of these two will be acceptable. And that is it for the notes on using the quadratic formula.